Okay, so crime unit. Okay, we're going to get started on the crime unit now. So you've hopefully previously seen my videos on the education and family units and the case studies involved in those. Now we're getting into sort of the serious units. Things get a little bit more complicated, but I mean, they're more enjoyable in my opinion. So hopefully you find them sort of enjoyable as well. But anyway, let's get started with the first one that you will encounter, will have encountered in the crime unit, and that is Becker. Now, Becker is a really important theorist because he's one of the few interactionists that you actually study, and his theories not only apply to the crime unit, but also actually they apply to things like the education unit, where you will have talked about labeling previously. So it's a very useful study for that reason. He's one of the sort of big names in sociology, so you really do need to understand where Becker is coming from, what he's talking about in the context of the crime unit, but not just that, in the other units as well. So let's get started now. Usually, I would point you towards the date. Okay, so 1963, obviously quite a long time ago. But when you're evaluating any theories, the fact that it's outdated should really be like one of the last things that you really think of, because it's, for me, it's quite lazy evaluation, and there are better things that you can say. Okay, so sort of hold your thought until sort of the end when we go through everything. So, as mentioned, Becker is mostly concerned with labeling. Okay, as an interactionist, he cares about how we interpret our surroundings and how we take in the information around us to sort of create a situation. Okay, so we determine what crime is, we determine what deviance is, and therefore, by sort of deduction, we define who a criminal is and how they should be treated. Okay, so this is a really important quote. So Becker argued that an act only becomes deviant or criminal when others define it as such. So as I said, so in the eye of the beholder, crime is created in the eye of the person who is seeing it. Okay, whether the label of deviancy actually gets applied depends on the following things. So who commits the act? So for example, if someone punches another person on Tring High Street, then that is very much assault. Okay. But if another person who's probably quite big, wearing boxing gloves, and punches someone in a ring, then that's not a deviant act. That is sport. Okay. So it very much depends on who commits the act, when it's committed. So at the time of the sporting event, for example, staying with that. Okay. So when it's committed. Also, sort of laws change. Okay, hopefully by now you would have done the idea that crime is socially constructed. So the time period in which an act is committed also takes effect. Where it is committed. So think about something more serious like gun crime, for example. In inner city London, if someone gets shot, then that is a tragedy. Okay, but take that and put it over in a conflicted area, so somewhere where there's a war. So, for example, right now, this might get outdated in years to come, but Ukraine, for example, if someone is firing a gun or trying to shoot someone in Ukraine right now, that's an act of war. Okay, it's not necessarily deviant. It's a whole different situation. Okay, who observes the act? Okay, so who's actually observing the act? This is a good one to think about something like vandalism. So someone's graffitiing a wall. Let's say it's Banksy, for example. For some people, that is a criminal act. That is vandalism. He is painting on a wall that isn't his. But for others, it's art. Okay, so it very much depends on how you interpret that situation. Okay, and then the negotiations that take place between the various actors involved in the interaction. So if you witnessed Banksy putting something on a wall, okay, you could have a very positive reaction, in which case, happy days, okay, you've just witnessed history in the making, okay, and you might say thank you to him, you might positively enforce that, in which case, great. Okay, or you could be the person who sees that as a deviant act, in which case you might call the police. Okay, you might sort of call the police and say this is going on right now. They might show up and arrest Banksy. Okay, at which point a very different interpretation of that situation has gone down. Banksy will be labeled as a criminal. Okay, maybe, and that label will start to take hold. Okay, so it very much depends on how you react to it and the interactions, the negotiations that happen between you, the offender, and maybe other people. Okay, so we've got this long bit of sort of text. Now, I would advise you read this on your own. I'm not going to read it to you because I think that that's a waste of time. But the bits in yellow are quite important. So I'm just going to read through those. So, first of all, we've got the agents of social control, for example, the police and the courts, have the power to make a label stick. Now, if I were to just label one of my students as a criminal, okay, that wouldn't work because number one, they wouldn't take me seriously. That's not really something that's appropriate for my role. And I don't have the right to make that label stick. I can't arrest you. I can't put you in prison. I can't put sanctions on you from a criminal basis. So that just wouldn't work. However, the police do and the courts do. They can throw you in prison for an act that you have committed. So if the police tell you that you are a thief, for example, and then you get put in prison for that theft, that label becomes a lot more powerful than just my lights have gone off, than just me, a teacher, or some parent or some other person telling you that you're a thief. Okay, so they have more power in that sense. So the second bit, assumptions will be made that the individuals concerned have negative characteristics normally associated with the label. So stick with that example of thief, for example. If you did go to prison for being that thief, if you did get told by the police that was who you were, that label's going to stick. Okay, you're going to internalize that. But also, the people around you who know that you have been to prison for that crime might start to see you as untrustworthy, someone you can't leave alone with like your belongings and things like that. So assumptions will be made based on what they already know about the offense. Okay, so that's how the labeling process gets sort of internalized, not only in the offender, but in the people around them as well. Okay, so one thing to note when you're reading through this paragraph, the bits in bold are important key terms. Now, always try and include these in your essays if you are trying to integrate Becker into your arguments. So, self-fulfilling prophecy, hopefully you understand what that is, but we'll potentially go through it. And deviant career. Now, that's something this will be fairly new to you, but that's quite an important key term as well. And there have been questions solely focused on this idea of a deviant career. So hopefully you've got this in your sheets, but this is a basic diagram of how the labeling process goes down. So you've got the initial situation, nothing's really happening, and then suddenly an act gets committed. So it could be vandalism, it could be murder, it could be anything. Okay, but either way, the person who has committed that act, if they are seen by someone else doing it, if they are caught by the police, if they are whatever, okay, someone has interpreted that act as a deviant act. And a label is applied, whether that be by the person or by the police or by the courts. Now, at that point, we reach the split. Okay, so at that point, the offender, the deviant, has a choice. Now, it's not a conscious choice, it's something that they subconsciously do. They can either accept the label, so let's just go with thief, for example, and that becomes a solid part of their identity, and that makes them more likely to commit that act again. So they accept the label of thief, it becomes their master status. They are a thief, a known thief. And that will not only shape their self-image, but also the interactions they have with people around them. Now, they could, however, have that label applied to them. They could go to prison even, but they could reject that label. They could say, it was a mistake. It was my fault. I shouldn't have done it. I'm not a thief. I just made a mistake. And in which case, they have renegotiated that label. They can let it fly off them like water off a duck's back. They won't let it affect their lives. It might have an initial effect, but actually they know that that's not them. They know that's not their identity. And so they go back to their normal life and sort of just let it be in the past. Okay? And then there's this little bit about Cicero. Now, this is basically a study that Cicero did in the 70s to prove Becker's labeling theory. And it was about the police and how they actually label people as more likely to be criminals. So it often was working class, ethnic minority people who were arrested or stopped and searched more often than their white middle class counterparts. It's something that we all know. Okay, we know that that happens in America. We know that, like, for example, with George Floyd and numerous other people in America, ethnic minorities are more likely to get pulled over by the police. Working class people are more likely to be pulled over by the police, even here in the UK. So that is just putting a name, Cicero, to something that we already know. Okay, and it's a really good sort of way to prove you know what you're talking about. So whilst Cicero himself isn't a yellow sheet. Okay, it's a name worth remembering. If you're talking about Becker, you should also mention Cicero as a way to prove what you're talking about. Okay, so key things to remember. Becker is an interactionist. He talks about the idea of labeling and how that actually happens. He talks about things like self-fulfilling prophecies, master statuses, and deviant careers. Okay, very important key terms. A good case study. You should definitely revise this one because it's one of those ones that always can always be used in a 12 marker, either as a valuation or as a point in itself. Okay, so any further questions on this one, please don't hesitate to talk to myself, Mrs. Tuvey, or anyone else in the department, and we can absolutely provide help on that. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.